So the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 and other pieces of legislation that have been enacted really provide lots of benefits to drug developers for focusing on this area of unmet need. And it's actually having an impact. So I want to give you an example of just how profitable this is by telling you about a specific company called Alexion Pharmaceuticals. This is a company that was founded in 1992 by Yale Medical School professor Leonard Bell. And it's a drug that, it's a company that was focusing initially on just one drug. The drug is called eculizumab. The trade name is Soliris. It's a drug that was ultimately approved in 2007 for this disease, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. This disease that affects 300 or 400 people in the United States, probably 7,000 people worldwide. So I'll tell you a little bit about the disease and then describe the drug, and then we'll talk about the financials for Alexion Pharmaceuticals, just so you can get a sense of how valuable or not valuable it is to be developing drugs for a handful of patients. So as I said, PNH is a blood disorder. Your body's immune system attacks your red blood cells. And so the symptoms are not just fatigue. Obviously, it's like anemia. Your blood cells are getting eaten up by your own immune system. But also, your bone marrow starts to fail, and you get blood clots and strokes. And it can be very, very deadly and painful. The median survival time after diagnosis of PNH is between 10 to 20 years. So people do get it sometime in later adulthood. And it's a very debilitating disease. It requires blood transfusions on a regular basis, typically 2 units a month. And you feel good on the day of the transfusion. And afterwards, you get progressively more and more tired and fatigued. And it's just a very, very difficult disease to live with, not to mention the various different complications of thrombosis and so on. So Soliris, when it was developed, and by the way, look at the dates. 1992 was when Bell established this company. The drug wasn't approved until 2007. It's 15 years. 15 years, okay? So that's the horizon over which you're talking about making an investment before you see the first dollar of revenue. It's 15 years. Most biotech companies don't do this. They will develop something to a certain clinical phase, like phase 2B, and at that point, when you've demonstrated efficacy in a small sample, sell it to big pharma, cash out, pay your investors, pay the VC, you're done, and you can move on. But that's not what Bell did. He stuck with it, and he took this idea from the very beginning all the way to FDA approval and marketing. So they sell this drug to patients. And with Soliris, it reduces, and in most cases, eliminates the need for blood transfusions. But it doesn't necessarily change the particular pathway of the disease. There isn't any strong evidence that it helps you live a normal life. It does seem to reduce blood clots, but it's viewed as more of a quality of life drug as opposed to a life-altering therapy. It does not necessarily allow you to live a full and extended life. We don't know what the life extension properties is because the drug's not been around that long, and we're talking about a relatively small patient population. So how do I know this? Well, I don't, obviously, but if you read the literature, and this is one of the coolest things about the medical industry, there are all sorts of individuals out there that are willing to participate in studying various different aspects of drugs and diseases, and you can get that information pretty much online. So information from an association called the Cochrane Studies. Cochrane is a nonprofit organization, and they routinely do analyses and combinations of meta-studies, that is, combining all the various different studies and literature to give you a sense of what the current state of the art is in various different therapies. And so they've got a report on this particular drug, eculizumab, and it was written in 2014. And this is a table of contents. It's about 55 pages long, where they describe the various different studies, what's been done, what hasn't been done, what the conclusions were, who did it, literature review, so on and so forth. And so if you read this study, it turns out that the conclusions are the very bottom paragraph. Therefore, prescription of eculizumab for treating patients with PNH can neither be supported nor rejected unless new evidence from a large, high-quality trial alters this conclusion. So there were some trials done, relatively small trials, because we're talking about a rare disease. There are not that many patients, right? But their criticism of those trials was that they were conducted by the drug manufacturer, which means that they're going to be likely biased, and they weren't a very large study, and the kind of controls that they would have liked to have seen were not present in those studies. So they were pretty open about their concerns, and you can read about that in this 55-page report. But the bottom line is, therefore, we urge the reader to interpret the trial results with much caution. Future trials on this issue should be conducted, so on and so forth. But they do say that during the current evidence indicates that compared with placebo, eculizumab increases health-related quality of life and increases transfusion independence. So it does do something. And patients actually very much appreciate the ability to be free from the fatigue, the pain, and the monthly transfusions. It's a big deal for those patients that have this particular affliction. But the trials don't tell us anything about whether or not this is really saving lives. It's certainly making the people who have the disease feel better, right? How much would you pay for this drug? I know it's hard. I've asked you this question earlier on, the first day of class. We talked about it. And I'm purposely asking you this out of the blue because it is hard to try to come up with a number. But I want you to come up with a number that, imagine you had this disease, or imagine one of your loved ones has this disease. What do you think this kind of a drug should be priced at? Knowing that you may not pay the vast majority of the cost, but you sort of know what a year of Gleevec costs, about $100,000. Harvoni, Sovaldi, $84,000 a year cure. What do you think this treatment would be? Anybody? Well, I gave it away. $440,000 a year. That's what it costs to treat a patient with this drug, which does not necessarily extend life, but it does make you feel a lot better. $440,000. Now, this seems crazy expensive. But in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about a small number of patients. So from an insurance perspective, do we really care? Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe it's okay. We're actually able to help them live more productive lives, if not necessarily longer lives. They certainly feel like they can live a more normal life apart from how long they live. Let me tell you a little bit about the business model of Alexion. So they focused not just on this drug. This was their main focus for 15 years. But since then, they've developed 2 or 3 other drugs, all in the rare disease space, focusing on various aspects of blood disorders and related issues. So they've gotten 2 or 3 other approvals. And in terms of the numbers, in 2016, they generated earnings of $3 billion, $3 billion in sales, $13 billion in assets, and $400 million in net income. The company is worth $30 billion in market cap. And a few years ago, they were actually added to the S&P 500. They are now part of the S&P 500, this rare disease drug. Okay? Their growth rate, if you take a look at finance.yahoo.com, and we've looked at growth rates of different companies when we were doing cost of capital analysis, the growth rate of Alexion forecasted over the next 5 years is about 19%. 19% growth rate. This is one of the fastest growing and apparently one of the most admired companies on the US exchanges. It's won a number of different awards, as you can see from their website. And just to give you a sense of how well investors have done, from 1996, when they went public, now remember, they were founded in 1992. Soliris wasn't approved until 2007. But they went public in 1996, March. From 1996 to December of last year, their compound annual rate of return over that entire period of time was about 21% a year, per year. compound return. 61% standard deviation, so quite a bit risky, quite a bit of fluctuation. But the Sharpe ratio, 0.3. Compare that to a Sharpe ratio of about 0.35 for the stock market, and you can sort of see why Alexion is so interesting to investors.